Hello.
Hey, bud, how's it going?
It's going. How you doing?
Not bad. How am I coming through?
You're sounding pretty good. You're clear and all that. I'm assuming you're testing out your earbuds.
Precisely right.
Very cool. We'll say hey hello to everybody on YouTube because I've got you on speakerphone just as I went live.
Hello, YouTube.
Yeah.
John Pearson here from Not So Sunny at the Moment, San Bernardino. I hope everyone is having a lovely evening.
So far so good.
Shower.
You're on your way back from that baby shower, huh?
No. I'm still there. I'm just stepping outside for a moment. A little quality time spent with a cancer stick.
The cancer sticks.
I didn't want to say the other one on live because, well, it can be, quite frankly, a little insensitive.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, since I've got you on the line, my broadcast tonight is about um, it is about fantasy tropes,
Okay.
and I was curious, what are some fantasy tropes that um, you are familiar with that you like, or what you don't like?
Well, for the purposes of our wide audience, what would you define a trope as?
Well, tropes, they're well, like any other literary trope. They're recurring images, themes, or devices that are used as common conventions in the genre. So, like
Okay.
for example, if you're writing a western, one of the tropes that you would see is you definitely see two cowboys dueling it out with a pair of six guns at high noon.
Ah, well, let's see. Now, is it strictly fantasy, you said? Or
Strictly
sci-fi?
fantasies, strictly fantasy because that's what I'm currently writing.
Okay. The lone hero.
The lone hero.
You look the lone hero. I mean, how many times? And this actually applies not just to fantasy, but across the board to genre you think of. You always have at least one hero. He's usually dark, keeps to himself, isolated, yet when called upon, rises in decisions. Everyone. A notable fantasy example would be Aragorn, also known as Strider.
Yeah, that's a good one. Although some would say that he would be classified as an anti-hero because he doesn't really want to do these things, but he knows he has to.
Well, I always thought of an anti-hero more as someone a bit like Deadpool. Deadpool I would consider more of an anti-hero, a counterpoint, or the Punisher. I mean, these are guys that they do dark, things that could be considered evil or malicious, but their end result is net positive, which is why they're anti-heroes. They're technically good guys. What they want to happen in the end is a good thing. The means to get there is dark. Aragorn, he was never like the Punisher was, violent for violence sake, or because he got some sick thrill out of it. He did do dark things, not because he wanted to, but because he had to.
Mm-hmm.
And even those dark things, I mean, you see him battling orcs, and you see him battling ringlings, monsters. You don't see him battling elves for thrills or kicks. And, you don't see him out there, going after common thieves, bandits, just finishing them off. He does what he has to do, otherwise he sticks to himself and fights for the side of life, which in my mind is
Yeah, that's true.
does think of another example of that.
Well, the tropes I'm going to be looking at are they're broken down into character tropes, um, world building tropes, and plot tropes. So I'm gonna see how many of these I actually fall into. I mean, you're currently working on uh, the narration for book one, so you would be just about as much of an expert as I am at this point with the series, at least with book one. Yeah. By the way, everybody, this is the same guy who is narrating and producing the audio version of book one, "The Heirs of Menenias," which will be out shortly after May 15th. So, just he's here. He's a real person. I didn't make him up or anything. Okay, we're gonna look at character tropes first.
All right. Character tropes.
So the first one I've got is the chosen one. The description here is a character who alone is capable of fulfilling an important purpose and whose responsibility it is to resolve the plot's main conflict, which will often be to save the world. Their example is Harry Potter, who is literally called the Chosen One.
Well, that definitely would be an example. Depending on your point of view, the chosen one could either be Asher or God.
Well, I mean, I looked at all three of the protagonist characters as being um, as being
Amara as well. Yeah, absolutely. Given the plot without really giving it away.
well, because they're referred to as the Chosen Warriors.
So they all could be, but with Asher, given the reason that he's special, what's behind why he's special, is really definitely a thing. It really, having those individuals, they can all be that, absolutely.
Okay.
Another, if we're focusing on here, the supporting cast of heroes and villains.
How so?
Who Galvin learns from, and who the heirs of Menenias choose to ally with, as far as sentient creatures are concerned.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Well, I mean, and we're kind of jumping ahead there to certain elements of the different tropes. In fact, so yeah, I guess they do kind of play in. So let me go on to the next one. The next one's called the Secret Heir. This character is usually an orphan that ends up being the long lost scion to a royal house or royal throne, raised on a farm or another humble situation, which is a contrast to their lineage. They maybe they lost their parents at a young age or sent away for their own protection. Perhaps they were switched at birth because of a misunderstanding.
Probably the most famous of those, not strictly speaking fantasy, but Batman.
I was also thinking, well, Batman isn't really a secret heir. I mean, people know that he is the heir to the Wayne fortune. He's a billionaire. He's very public about that. People just don't know
he
that.
He lost his parents at a young age, and then he later assumed the mantle. So, in a way, because he lives a dual life, and from my own, admittedly, limited reading of material, when he thinks of himself, he doesn't think of himself as Bruce Wayne being that.
This is true.
He thinks of himself, as Batman having to be Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, that's true. Well, one of the examples that came to my mind was Luke Skywalker, automatically from Star Wars.
And Anakin.
Yeah.
Anakin, he had his mother, and from a young age, but he was taken away, so he learned, and he is, you know, probably the most powerful force user that ever existed.
I think Anakin falls more into line with the whole chosen one because he is literally referred to as the chosen
Doesn't
one.
mean you can't be both.
That's true. That's true.
Both.
Some characters do a little bit cross lines there. So the third character trope is the evil overlord, fire and brimstone, darkness, and inhospitable lands. Um, they live in a realm that reflects their wicked intentions, surrounded by minions and followers, often bent on world domination. So the example here is Maleficent. I would also entreat Lord Sauron from Lord of the Rings.
To a certain degree, I would say Saruman as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so my question is, do any of my characters fall into that evil overlord mentality? I mean, obviously Menenias, who's the title character, yeah, he does. Well, okay, so Tradian, yeah, because his kingdom has one city to it. It's mostly covered in desert, very dangerous desert.
And knowing what I know of the character, again, trying not to give it away, definitely. I mean, the other heirs are, in their own way, I mean, they are just as evil as twisted, but at the same time, they are they're more like Senator Palpatine from the Old Republic versus the Emperor of the Imperial Order.
So kind of working behind the scenes.
And, visibly not appear to the evil overlords. You can't just look at them and say, bad guy.
Yeah.
It doesn't scream at you. So, the evil overlord is.
Yeah, okay. So, so the next trope is the reluctant hero. Protagonists usually thrust down a path of the story that they don't wish to be a part of. They want to go back to their normal life and continue, but they continue a quest out of obligation or necessity. The example here that they're giving is uh, Richard Mayhew, who is the primary character of Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere, which is a really good book. I read it in college. And it's, I guess, the biggest comparison for this is like the difference between Frodo, who wants to go back to the Shire but has to complete a task, and Conan the Barbarian, who really wants to do everything he can to be a hero.
Well, I would probably say Keshi Kovacs as a reluctant hero. I mean, he's the protagonist of the series that's popularly known right now as Netflix's Altered Carbon. Which, for those of you who have not seen it, I would absolutely encourage. Definitely adult.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, he's very reluctant to. Yeah, I remember going back and rewatching season one. I'm looking forward to season two on that one. He is definitely a reluctant hero because he from the very beginning he tells everybody just to piss off and put him back in put him back in sleep mode or whatever.
You do. I would say that you do have such a character present.
Which one?
Asher.
Yeah.
He would love nothing more than to return to his original life.
Yeah, he can't really do that though.
He can't, but it doesn't mean he doesn't want to, which would affect how he behaves in the story.
Yeah.
And that comes across in many of his interactions with others.
That's very true. That's very true. I never really looked at him as being a reluctant character at first. I mean, I take that back. I did and I didn't. Gavin is a character that's been raised. He knows this history. He's willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done. Asher he's kind of just like, it's like, here's the deep end. Try swimming.
And he's through my what I have done with book one, he just seems to fight it every step of the way, and he eventually does come to terms with his gift, with his reason for being one of the chosen warriors. But that doesn't take away that he would rather not.
Yeah.
So that would be my take.
That's a pretty important take. So let's see here. The next character trope is the lucky novice. It says this sometimes manifests when a character who's had never attempted a specific activity before is suddenly extremely talented at that specific skill. Usually it's
like Harry Potter at Quidditch.
Harry Potter at Quidditch, or the example that they give here is Anakin when he rides the Starfighter for the first time, and he's able to keep up and with all the other Starfighters and blow up the control ship for the droid army. He should not have been able to.
Hey, what about Rey and the first fight that she had with Kylo Ren?
Yep. Definitely a lucky novice situation there. And I would definitely count Star Wars as being more fantasy driven than sci-fi driven, even though there's spaceships and aliens and stuff like that.
There's nothing to say that fantasy cannot be set in the future, which was by our definition currently science fiction. The future with new, currently unexplainable technology, but the elements are all there. As far as your book is concerned, I don't feel that so far it's out on the boat. Yes, there were elements of luck in certain interactions, but it wasn't, so the example I'm thinking of, it wasn't the character himself.
Yeah.
It was something beyond him, so I wouldn't count.
That's true.
You missed that particular landmine.
Well, I think it's also important to notice that tropes aren't necessarily landmines unless they are done to death.
Cliché.
Yeah, and when they start becoming cliche, that's when you might have a problem.
Yeah. No. You're not lens flaring your book to death.
Yeah. J.J. Abrams reference there. No lens flare. Okay. Number 6 character trope is the mentor, usually an elderly character who prepares the protagonist for whatever conflict they're facing. They often leave before the big climax. And whether they are killed, retire, or have to leave to carry out a job elsewhere, forcing the protagonist to stand on their own 2 feet. Merlin is a great example of this.
Definitely have that.
So which character falls into that trope?
Dobrin.
Okay, yeah. Well, although to be fair, Dobrin is not the one who leaves.
Well, yeah, but the mentor isn't strictly about him leaving. The mentor is the elderly sage, the font of knowledge and wisdom, like Merlin out of Arthurian legend.
Well, Merlin was the mentor example that they use here in this article.
That has to be probably the most prominent one. But
that one and
absolutely.
I would say that one and for sure Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, if you look at the original Star Wars, it follows almost the exact same plot points as Arthurian legend. In fact,
down to the lightsaber Excalibur.
exactly. By the way, we had someone pop up online who asked me to read their screen name. Their screen name is "I like to eat KFC chicken." Which, to be fair, I would rather not eat KFC chicken. Mainly because KFC chicken is nasty. If I'm going to eat chicken, it's going to be Buffalo Wild Wings.
Agree to disagree. I do not like KFC enough to make it my screen name. I think that the Colonel, provided he was still alive, would be very happy with this individual. But possibly also having a restraining order. So, take that of what you will.
Fair enough. Now this particular individual is actually reciting the "I don't like sand" soliloquy from Attack of the Clones. I'm assuming they like the worst of the Star Wars films.
It's okay. It's okay. I love KFC, friends. Everybody has their low moments. You just happen to be going through that right now. We understand. We sympathize.
But we don't empathize.
We're going to move on.
Yeah, we're going to move on. Okay, world building tropes. The first one is that the world never progresses. The trope follows this when a novel or series covers a society through the ages, but the world never seems to change or progress. And it could be a century later, or no social, technological, political, or cultural development seem to have occurred. This one is fairly typical of high fantasy. It usually takes place on grand epic scales. And yeah, I would say that as far as world building, mine to some extent does fall into this trope, at least with the first book. In the second book, I'm not giving anything away by saying that some of the ships have cannons. There is some existence of gunpowder, but nothing really more than that.
The thing that people need to keep in mind is that right now, the way the world is, we honestly expect major technological leaps in a very short period of time. Now, I'll give you an example. 40 years ago, okay, so we're talking about the 80s, all right, the late 80s and the late 70s, the Walkman was just, it was a feature that had only recently been developed. And everybody was listening to their headphones, and they had either, in some cases, portable 8-track players, but mostly it was just about cassette players, given that the CD wasn't even made until 1981.
Yeah.
So, just like you see on Guardians of the Galaxy, he loves his player with his headphones, wired headphones. I'm speaking to you instead of wireless headphones. They're AirPods, because I am notorious anti-Apple, but they are similar enough that you can use that as an example. And through a Bluetooth technology to a phone in my pocket that has a computer that is more powerful than the one that was used to put men on the moon.
This is true.
And that, that's not even within my lifetime. Okay? We've advanced so far, so fast in areas of technology. But the question is, are we truly making leaps forward, or are we just taking advantage of technology?
Well, and see here.
Hang on. I have an example. I want you to think about someone from the Middle Ages, a researcher who wanted to know more about a given subject. Now, the most time, they would be in candlelit rooms, and they would, they'd be searching through scrolls, and they'd be running in a language that nobody has themselves. These days, You want to know something? All you have to do is ask Google. So, the database of knowledge is immense, and it's right at your fingertips. But the effort, the steps you go through the research, finding of sources, the correlating the facts, and putting together the presentation of those facts to learned colleagues is essentially unchanged.
Yeah, that's true.
For 1,000 years. So, while we are technologically advancing at an incredible pace, it doesn't mean everything is advancing like that. Vacuum, an amazing new technology, but the actual act of vacuuming, unless you buy yourself a little Roomba, is completely unchanged from when they were first introduced, and that's in decades.
Well, I think what the trope is getting at is that what you see hasn't changed much in the course. Like, for example, the example that they reflect on a couple of times here on world building tropes is Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, where the story picks up, thousands of years have passed, dozens, if not hundreds, of kings from a particular lineage have sat on the Iron Throne, and the world hasn't changed. They're still living in a pseudo-European medieval setting that, and that's actually part of the next trope, where they're dueling with swords. They're still doing everything by candlelight. There's no electricity. There's no indoor plumbing. There's no fresh water without going to a well. Um, that's what they're getting at. I mean, even the political and cultural developments haven't changed much.
Well, there's no reason for those to change if the rest of it hasn't changed. The only reason, in my opinion, that things changed in the real world is entirely because of the scientific method. If you don't have the scientific method, all you have is trial and error. All you're going to end up with a lot of errors and very cheap successes. I mean, that's one of the reasons society stagnates. And there has to also be a pressure to advance, like, again, going to the moon.
Right.
The moon in 69.
Right.
The only reason we got there then is there was an enormous amount of socio-political pressure between the two superpowers to do that. And then once we got there, it's like, okay, we did it. And then up until very recently, never went back. Now there's similar pressure, a little bit of a different pressure, but it is pressure nonetheless, for the efforts to go to Mars. And without some sort of an external pressure to force change, to force growth, society stagnates. That's the way, that's just how things are. Hey, it was good enough for my dad, it's good enough for me, is almost a direct result of that.
Well, I read an article though when it comes to fantasy world building, especially like something like Lord of the Rings or with what I'm going with. The reason why technology especially doesn't advance a whole lot isn't because of the need or the development of it. It comes down to the fact that things like magic and dragons exist. I mean, you don't need to create something that conjures faster than light travel if you can open a magic portal between two different points in time in space.
You don't need to develop gunpowder if you can throw fireballs.
Exactly.
Even though gunpowder is not just for making things, gunpowder is designed to explode, but it's not just that tool. They use it for, in mines and things like that. Or, when they need to destroy a building safely, they inflate explosive charges to drop in place. To inflate rather than explode. It's all a matter of how the tools are used.
True.
But the initial charge to do that usually is driven by a military need. If you don't have military need, like gunpowder, you just get a bunch of spellcasters for fireballs, lightning bolts. There's no need to explore electricity, gunpowder, or anything like that. But as far as your book is concerned, so far, while there are certain elements that are static, there is enough, change that it would. I wouldn't say it's completely stagnant. I would just say that the pace of change is glacial.
Fair enough. Moving on to the next point. The powerful artifact. This is a trope in fantasy. It says this convention is used across all types of genres, a MacGuffin, if you will. Like there's an object of great power that must be saved from falling into the wrong hands. It's not necessarily inherently evil, but it can be used for evil purposes. The example they, yeah, the One Ring. That's exactly. Or if you're a fan of the Never-Ending Story, the Aron medallion. Because if you know, actually, what's funny is the example they give is from Never-Ending Story Part 2, which was actually a pretty weak sequel to the original. And when Bastion gets a hold of the Aron, the more he uses it, it grants wishes, but it makes him a cold, cruel version of himself. And I'm quoting the article here.
Well, look at Stargate series. In the series, they have the sarcophagi, and for the record, it is sarcophagi, not sarcophagus. If any of you out there are taking sarcophagus, smack yourselves and move forward. They have these sarcophagi that if you are mortally wounded, if you are dead, it will repair the damage and reanimate. However, it has its side effects. One of which is repeated use results in extreme arrogance, extreme callousness, and eventually, you become functional, you become a sociopath. So it is an object of great power that can do good in the saving of life. But it also can be very evil.
Well, so my question then is, do you see any kind of powerful artifact being used in my series? At least as far as book 1 is concerned.
I would say so far I haven't seen one item that corresponds.
Fair enough. All right. So let's see. The next trope in world building.
I hate to cut this short. I got 5 minutes.
All right. Well, let's make the most of this 5 minutes. The next trope is the homogeneous species. Like all elves are beautiful and love trees, or all dwarves are obsessed with gold and living underground. Categorizing an entire race into a few commonalities and stuff like that. Do you see that happening in my series at all?
Yes, I do.
Where?
Well, in your series, and this isn't very far into what I was giving you away. The dwarves are, they are very secretive. They are very xenophobic almost, and the elves are all, they're either extraordinarily long-lived or effectively immortal, and the other one that I noticed, that the halflings tend to take the best traits that parents, humans and elves, and the halflings are just human elves. I have yet to see a half human, half dwarf, or half dwarf, half elf. They may occur later. I don't know. I haven't seen yet. But the halflings are typically an interbreeding of human and elf. They're not like the Lord of the Ring halflings, who are an entirely separate race.
Yeah.
So,
well,
those are just a couple of things.
Yeah, in my series, I'm not actually a big fan of dwarves to begin with. So, the dwarves that you saw at the very beginning of the series, that's about the extent of their presence in the series right now.
Oh, and the painting of certain individuals as inherently evil.
I'm assuming you're thinking of the vampires.
Well, I'm trying not. Yeah, okay, you said it. I didn't want to give it away, but yes.
Well,
I'm not saying that vampires are, could be cuddly and so on and so forth. They, the fact that they come across as inherently evil, and it's. Well, I mean, it's certainly possible they're complete racist psychopaths, sociopaths, or narcissists. It is, there's always some room in there. I'm not a Twilight fan. I don't do sparkly vampires. I don't do the, if they brood on how they want to kill you. But at the same time, I also think there's a possibility that some of them do not live up to the stereotype.
fair enough. And I try to take the vampires in a completely different direction, and hopefully you'll see that as you're working on the narration.
For the record, I'm about halfway through through narrating the first book. It's going well, and it's been a real privilege.
I'm glad that you're enjoying it. I'm glad because it is. I'm listening to the segments that you've sent me, and I'm liking how it flows. So yeah, awesome. Well, John, thank you for joining me on the inadvertently on the live stream.
Well, Garrett, it's been a pleasure to have been on your program, and we should do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Hopefully, you'll be able to join me in person.
That's possible.
Have to work something out. Got to figure out if there's a way of streaming simultaneously with two different YouTube locations. We'll figure it out. Actually, if you get yourself Instagram, I don't know if you do or not, but we can do that with Instagram.
We'll see.
All right. Thanks, John. I'll catch you later.
You take care, and have a good night, everybody.
All right. So that was John Pearson. He is the narrator and producer of the audio version of Book 1, The Heirs of Menenias. I've been listening to the chapters, and they are going so well. A few setbacks with getting the production done before the end of March, but it's going well. All right, so continuing on with tropes. These are tropes. First of all, let me back up. My throat is just killing me. Been doing a lot of yard work this last week. It's spring break here in Central California, and so I have been doing yard work, and I got faces full of pollen, and it's messed with my sinuses so badly to the point where I'm losing my voice. So I am trying to keep it as best as I can for you guys. Plot tropes. That's what we're on now. The next one is the waiting evil. It says like long ago, an evil force is defeated in battle, locked away, never to wreak havoc again, until present time in the series. My books do that to some extent. Book 1, Heirs of Menenias. Menenias is a warlord that is introduced in the prologue. He is defeated, and then chapter 1 jumps ahead about 200 years. But it's not him per se that is wanting to make the comeback. He prophesies that his heirs, the title characters of the book, are going to come back and finish what he started. So it's a variation on the waiting evil, but not exactly done the way that the trope usually falls into place. So it's definitely not like Voldemort from Harry Potter. The Here Comes the Cavalry Twist is the next one. All seems lost. The villain is too strong despite a noble effort. Heroics just can't do anything to fix the problem. And then all of a sudden, bam, uh, the cavalry comes in and uh, the heroes win. You see this a lot with the Lord of the Rings movies. The eagles that show up, the trees when Two Towers when Gandalf the White shows up with the entire uh, horde of um, riders from of Rohan. At the Battle of Helm's Deep. That is a huge cavalry moment. Um, anyway, I don't do that in my series because I don't think that's a necessary thing to throw in there. I'm a big fan of seeing what happens when heroes fail, and so in my first book, especially, you see that happening. Um, the next one is a black and white morality theme. The black and white morality theme is definitely something that plays in there. However, one of the things I like to do is I like to twist that. I like to play that. Um, Characters that you think are good are not necessarily good. Characters that you think are bad are not necessarily bad. There's some shades of gray in there, uh, and not. It's kind of hard to go into. I don't like seeing characters who are always good or always bad because that takes away from their humanity. Oh, hey, there's a question here. When is the next book giveaway? The next book giveaway is actually tonight. MLG Dolphin Studios. I'm actually doing it tonight. It was for Twitter. If I hit 1,000 Twitter followers, which I did several weeks ago, and I'm actually doing. I actually just getting. I just selected someone from my Twitter follower list. However, I will be doing another one uh, probably in the middle of summer, probably around July, and I will talk about that a little bit later. MLG Dolphin, if you haven't followed me on Twitter, do so because that's a great way to do it. All right, so going back to the trope, um, the black and white morality, it takes away from the humanity of the characters. I like to see scenes where even villainous characters can have good moments, and I like to see scenes where even the best characters, the hero characters, have these moments of where their humanity is being tested. Um, so, like for example, there's one point in book 3 where Asher, who is he's the central character of book 3. He goes from being part of a larger cast, an ensemble cast in book 1, to being the solo focus of book 3. And in that, there comes a point where he's been doing all this good stuff throughout the series, being a good hero, and he hits this point where he's wounded and he's just laying in his water, thinking, you know what, I'd be fine right here if I just died. There's horrible things happening, and he's just laying in this pool of water, and he's willing to just let himself die if that's what it takes, just to give himself some rest, which is a very selfish thought on his part, but you can see kind of the thought process of what's going on behind it as you build up to that scene. Um, the next trope under the plot for fantasy is the quest. This is usually referred to as the hero's journey or the hero quest format. Um, and I'll say this: when it comes to my series, yes, I do like to do quests. A lot of my characters were based on comic book characters, which I've said in other live streams. My characters were just to some extent were based on uh, role playing games that like Dungeons and Dragons, stuff like that, where the story only moves along because of plot or because of quests in the plot. Anyone who's ever played Dragon Age or Elder Scrolls or any of those games will understand how that goes. And so this is definitely a trope that I go into. But one of the things I like to do is I like to take the quest in a different direction. Um, so, for example, in book one, The Heirs of Menenias, um, in that book, the like the three heroes, they're on the same journey. They're trying to do the same thing. The end result is going to be the same, but how they get there is different. Gavin is one of the characters that he knows what he's supposed to do to some extent. Amara knows what she's supposed to do to some extent. But then you got Asher, who is he's the reluctant hero, and he has no idea. He doesn't want to have anything to do with this. He doesn't want to have any part of it. As John was saying earlier in the live stream, um, he is fighting it tooth and nail. He wants to go back to his old life, and every time he does that, he's thrust into a new situation that forces him out of that comfort zone, that forces him into a more dangerous situation, and forces him to come into recognition of his powers and his abilities. So yeah, but I like to do different things with that quest. Um, there's a few things I do, and from a technical perspective, I don't go through the process of deconstructing any of these tropes. I don't go through the process of subverting them, at least not intentionally. Uh, One of the things that I like to do is I like to put my heroes in mortal peril. I like to get them into a situation where they should die, not because of anything else other than the fact that it breaks a rule. In a lot of storytelling, especially the hero's journey type of stories, there's this unspoken rule where the hero is supposed to stay alive throughout the entire thing. Maybe their mentor dies, maybe a side character dies, but the primary protagonist is supposed to live. The primary antagonist is supposed to die. You see that throughout Arthurian legend. You see that in Star Wars. You see that in Lord of the Rings, and that's what happens. It's the expectation. For me, I try to subvert that rule by doing the opposite. Uh, and I'm not going to say how characters die, but I will say that my heroes throughout the series do die at some point, just because it's necessary. Because if a character goes through all these brushes with death and they come out the other side completely unscathed, that's not realistic. I mean, we have people who go into car accidents in the real world, people who fall off cliffs, people who they get injured, and you see the results of that. Very rarely do you hear of someone who, you know, you fell off a building and completely lived to tell the tale. Unless, of course, it was like a 10-foot building and they only fell like 5 feet or whatever. But my point is, it's important uh, to kind of find your own way of subverting it. I don't go through it like I said, in a technical way, but I want to go through and make the story my own. Oh man, my throat is just getting worse here. So I said that I was going to be doing the live giveaway for this uh, live stream. I went through my Twitter feed, and I kind of went through it in a certain way. At this point, I'm currently, the goal was to hit 1,000 followers. I hit 1,000 followers. I said I promised I was going to do another um, giveaway of book one. So what I ended up doing is I looked at the current number of followers that I have now, which as of this morning I had 1,317. So what I ended up doing is I took the 13 and the 17, I added them together, and then I took that number, which is 30, and then I took the 13 and 17 again, I multiplied them, and that came out to 221. So I added the 221 to the 30, and that gave me a number, 251. So I scrolled down my list until I hit number 251. That individual is, you can't really see it, maybe you can, Packy Smith, at Packy Smith. I will be tagging you on Twitter, and you can DM me that information, Packy, and I'll be able to get you the copy as well. But so yeah, I will be doing another giveaway on through Twitter and Instagram in a couple of months, probably by midsummer. My goal at this point now is to hit 2,000 followers. If I can hit 2,000 followers on Twitter, I'll do another giveaway. That one will be more localized to this area, to Central California, because I actually have something really fun in mind for that. But we'll see how it plays out. In the meantime, next week, this next Saturday, there will be a new vlog posted. This one will be Forming Fantasy. So I'll be looking at one of the kingdoms in my series and another one of the primary protagonists. And those promos will start rolling out probably Monday, maybe Tuesday at the latest. And then as for May, I've got free comic book day coming up on May 4th, which is Star Wars Day. I'm excited for that. Going to be live tweeting and streaming every so often from the location where I'll be, selling my books and promoting and doing live free comic book day. We've also got another author awareness coming up that second week of May. Creators Corner, which will have featured a couple of other writing tips that I have for any would-be writers out there. And then at the end of the month of May, again, another Forming Fantasy. And so I'm looking forward to what this next month has in store. Next week, I will hopefully have everything loaded out and sent out through YouTube with the new vlog. And I'll be hopefully watching Endgame. So that right there is my plan for the next week. All right. I've got 53 minutes and 41 seconds going. I'm going to call it an early night because it's almost 10 o'clock here. And my throat is just wasted. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.